do now, instead of asking each table to report back and putting that last table in the position of trying to come up with something new and unique that hasn't come forward yet, it's going to be a little bit more free form, and I'd actually just like to ask for volunteers, for people who are willing to come up and let us know what they felt was a meaningful topic of discussion at their table. And then I've also asked Steve and Carolyn just to kind of facilitate the discussion. So feel free to direct questions or clarification to Steve and Carolyn, especially because we didn't really get into a deeper dive on the data that was presented and the implications. But it's not a formally structured conversation, but what we're really looking for are your outcomes and your queries, and of course in the big picture, how can CAMEO respond to that, and how do we need to shift if we need to. So, volunteer? Oscar! So we're doing this handheld, like, urban documentary there. So
It's kind of that shaky handheld look.
Okay, so if I'm too loud or talk too fast, just raise your hand, guys. Okay, so again, I'm Oscar. In my group, I had Anne, Brandon, Leah, and Brett. And let's see, what we talked about were really the implications of the data that we were just presented on our programming. One of the things that came out of it was the issue of WIA funding, and how a lot of the WIA funding is really tied to metrics, and it's a little bit of a challenge for us to address the independent workers when it comes to WIA funding, but CAMEO, of course, is doing a lot of work to really change the way that those metrics are measured. We also talked a little bit about the generational issues. So some of the data that came out was around the generations, and one of the things that I know I would like to do more of in my center is around succession planning. And we did have a couple of people from FarmLink, and there's definitely, in my mind, a crisis going on there in the ag world, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but there's something like a ratio of 9-to-1, you know, Gen Y to the mature groups, and so that definitely tells me that we really need to do more to address how we train, support people coming into an industry where they don't have that kind of experience. So one of the other things that came out was that ag tends to be a generational thing, where it tended to be historically, where, you know, the farm was passed from one generation to another. That isn't happening anymore, and so it creates a lot more challenges to make sure that we are supporting, you know, these people moving into a new industry, because we all need to eat, and it's something that's really fundamental. And obviously, the other thing that came out of this was that we as practitioners tend to really be, and I know this is true for my center, we tend to really be under capacity when it comes to serving this particular population. Beyond that, there might have been more that came out. Anyone else like to add anything?
Well, just along those lines.
Please say your name and.
Sure, Brett with FarmLink and Feed the Hunger Foundation. That a lot of the small business and economic development agencies don't think about agriculture when it comes to measuring, you know, the audience that's being served, and how success and impact is measured.
I think that's it before.
Do I need to stand? I do. Okay. I don't remember the name. My name is Constance Anderson. I'm the director of the Small Business Development Center at Pacific Coast Regional. And I apologize for not remembering everyone's name in our group. But we talked about the term independent, and the idea that how it works and how we can use it in our individual programs, and how much we like the term. We talked about how our clients define success. We talked about success, and in some cases we determined that our clients might determine success differently than we might determine success. And I think we came to the conclusion that the success should be defined, they should be allowed to define what success is. So we talked about the number of employees that our businesses that we work with might have. About 90% of them are less than 5 employees, and the age group is probably all over. We talked about businesses creating jobs. In my center, a lot of the businesses that come in to our center are not necessarily thinking about creating jobs. And that's okay, because there are other things that we can do, metrics that we can measure to determine whether we think they're successful, and they naturally will think that they're successful. Was there anything else in one like that? Well done. No? That's it. I hope that makes sense.
We hear from the president's table.
I was thinking, let's get ours in before everybody takes our stuff.
Okay.
I am Stacy Sanchez.
I am Stacy Sanchez, CDC Small Business Finance. And we also spent a lot of time discussing success and identifying what is success, and agree that the individual business owners or independent workers should be able to define their own success. But we talked also about identifying your own success metrics and then making those work for you. So, you know, if you apply for a grant and say these are the things that we're going to measure, then you need to measure those things and then get back, you know, with the results. We talked a little bit about how can we market? What's the message that we're going to get out to these individual segments as to why they should use our services, and or how are they going to benefit, trying to figure out a way to target those individual segments. Nathan brought in a point which I got very excited about, and I think we all got excited about, maybe not as much as me, but we can reach out to employers who are, you know, go to where who's using the independent contractors independent workers, and that have become dependent on them for the success of their business, and that they can help us to bridge that or make that connection with these independent workers so that they can continue to be independent workers and have the skill sets that they need to continue to be successful as independent workers, but that the employers are aware that the more successful their independent workers are, the more they can rely on them long term, and maybe if they knew about some of the resources, they would help to direct the independent workers to us for those skill sets. You want to add something to that? Or did I capture that? Anything else we want to add? I think that was pretty much it.
What about the marketing?
Heidi wants me to say something here.
Okay.
Sorry. So again, I'm Oscar with the Country Contest DC. So the idea is that yes, at my center we are actually doing something like that. We're launching a workshop series at the local Spark Point, and we're going to replicate it at all the one-stops. And the idea is to identify entrepreneurs, bring them into our center, and serve them. And those people that aren't ready for our services yet, connect them to SCORE, connect them to nonprofits that are doing more soft skills building. And yeah, because I'm hosted by WIB, for those of you guys that don't know, for a Workforce Investment Board. And so I'm really trying to get the WIB to understand that if we don't address this need, we're going to miss the boat. We're going to be completely irrelevant in less than a generation. So thank you, Stacey, and thank you guys all for doing what you're doing. And I'm really trying to, again, really get the workforce investment world to understand that we need to address not just entrepreneurship, but the independent workers, whatever we call them. Thanks.
Comments? Elizabeth?
Other things that are we had a group of folks from all different types of segments of populations, actually. Some that work with veterans, some that work with women, some that work with refugees and microloan funds, as well as technical assistance. And we talked a lot about the same things that you all already mentioned, so I'm not going to repeat. But I think three of the things that also came away from our table was, one is that recognizing the fact that time in today's world is one of the biggest assets for folks, especially our clients. And so looking at what are the creative ways that our programs can be delivering services to our clients that meet the time restrictions that they have. So looking at ways to facilitate training and opportunities that can be kind of on the spot, and also during the time when they're trying to structure their business so that they don't miss opportunities as entrepreneurs and independents. The other thing that we talked about was the return on community conversation, and a fact of trying to visualize that for people and for funders and investors in our programs. So talking about taking the example that the Emergent folks gave about how they aren't actually hiring employees, but they have this whole network of people that they're contracting work out to. And that has a huge return on the community, and actually visualizing that so it does become tangible for people rather than just credit score increase, number of employees hired, and revenue increase. And then the third thing that we talked about is just the trend of moving from transactional thinking to, I think Noah said, value and relational thinking.
Value focused and relational thinking.
Yeah.
Relationship and relational thinking.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Basically what I mean, and I'm Noah Harris with the Veterans Business Outreach Center program, and essentially what I'm talking about is the difference in thinking in terms of transactions where we do something for someone and then they give us money for that said good or service, to think about the actual tangible, no kidding way that we have improved their experience of life, and that's the reason that they come back and patronize our services. So rather than an individual, whether he or she is an entrepreneur or an employee, thinking in terms of how do I add value, or I could sum it up in one word, relevance. How do I remain relevant to the other person on the other side of the interaction, whether he or she is an employer or whether he or she is a customer. And to do that, that is how that person or that business will continue to look at their skill sets, their knowledge, their skills, their abilities, their relationships, their lessons lived and learned, and translate that into some kind of meaningful outcome for a customer or an employer. That was all.
Did you guys want to say something?
Sure. Hi, I'm Susan Brown. I work with CAMEO and I'm an independent worker. I think the one thing we thought about at this table, because the data was broken down by generation and indicated that different generations need different help. So one idea we talked about was having different services for different generations based on need, so that there'd sort of be a Gen Y track, a Gen X track, a Boomer track. And not only would the content be associated with what that generation needs, but even maybe the method of delivery, you know, so that, you know, Gen Yers are going to want to participate and get data a certain way, Boomers are going to do it very differently. So, and then maybe having one where we can get the Boomers and the Gen Yers together, and you know, between them they've got a great set of skills to start a business together. So it was just sort of playing with that generational thing in terms of program design and delivery. Yes, okay.
Can I say something, even though I wasn't a leader?
Yeah. We're all leaders here.
It struck me by taking a look at the data and listening to the conversations in this room that the way the IRS treats independent contractors then is really antiquated and way off base. Am I correct?
Yes.
Because these independent workers aren't looking to find a job, you know, they want to stay that way. And so if I want to utilize them as an employer, then there's a huge disincentive by the way that the IRS treats independent contractors. So perhaps we need to think about changing that.
Yeah, that's something we've discussed in CAMEO a few times at staff meetings and so forth, is just the idea that this independent sector is growing. It's primarily individuals, but nobody is really speaking for that group on an advocacy side, you know, on a tax side. You know, traditional labor has traditionally had the unions to advocate for them. That's going away. Big business has another set of priorities that they advocate for. So we question sometimes at CAMEO, is that a position that we should take our network, our members, to really try to become, you know, much stronger advocates for those actual workers and those folks, because that is where the growth is. And should our programs, or should your programs, encompass some training and thinking around that? And if that were the case, what would it look like?
Yes,
And
you should.
Also, we're seeing independent workers begin to unionize in a way. Unionize maybe being kind of a, not the right word, but I have an intuition or instinct that we can bring the labor movement in with what we're doing in a very positive way. there are certain commonalities. We really would rather not see tax giveaways for big boxes, and those are something that the labor movement really supports as well. So we've just been picking that up. Heidi and I have been, in the self-employment assistance bill, been forging some new relationships with labor, and I think that there's some potential there. I don't know exactly what it is yet. It's not ripened yet, but it's definitely there, and it certainly would be interested in I was just talking to somebody about setting up, was it with you, Noah, or someone to make a meeting with some labor folks for CAMEO. That'd be great. So I'm number 6. So is this the last one?
Yeah.
Are we the last one? And after I do my little presentation, just want to make sure Barbara Vorsek is going to just say a few words before we leave today. So make sure she has a chance. Okay. My group had Carmen Herrera, Nancy Swift, and Edwin from over here in the corner. Let's see. We talked about really how can 90% of the people going to these 3 programs that were in our group are low income and some very low income. And many are Latino immigrant. So the question partly was, how do we attract more young people? And given that many of them have poor educations as well, what do we have to offer? And so we started through Carmen kicking off, because she has this amazing new commercial kitchen incubator and space in Watsonville that is a potential resource for young people. How do we bring them in? And they have the controversy over big box attraction for jobs, where are the best jobs? So one thing we talked about was using her incubator for teaching healthy cooking to youth and families. The baking events like Don Polverone has that attracted us to for the selection when he was being selected for his award later today. He has these baking events, and he has some other kinds of things that brought young people into his bakery. The food distribution hub would also give some opportunities. This was one way of using this new resource in the community. Also the fact that the young people are using cell phone technology. We didn't really have time to get into that, but I do think that there's potential for our programs in terms of using cell phone technology in delivery of technical assistance. Family child care providers were another sector. I know Constance has been very successful in working with them and reaching them with loans. So that was another group that we were talking about being another potential target market. And then Nancy really brought up the fact that they see that contingent workers, not necessarily very low income, but people who are moderate income, are her new clients now up at Jetty. And they're the future of economic development, but that message hasn't really penetrated City Hall, hasn't penetrated economic development. And that there's a need to create a more compelling message about the new workforce, people like Nathan. So Nathan, we're going to need your help with creating that message. And then that this has an application for engaging low income and youth because of this emerging contingent workforce. Okay, thanks. So, do you want to have Barbara say something?
Yeah, and I have a comment about the workforce too. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago that was put on by the Freelancers Union. They were doing a listening tour, and I was part of an event in San Francisco, and it was your regular assortment of, communications consultants and, copywriters and all these different, folks who are your independent workers. But there was one woman there, and I was very surprised because she's a chaplain and she works at hospice, and she was an employee, but now she is a consultant, not through her choice, but so now she is a chaplain at 2 different hospices. And on the one hand, it's like, okay, we're all getting older, job security for her, I guess. But on the other hand, this is a very sensitive woman who, by my best estimate, was maybe in her 60s and had always been an employee and is now finding herself at, 60 plus years of age doing this very meaningful work, which she loves, and that's all she knows how to do, but she has no clue what it means to file a Schedule C. And, you know, and so that's what, again, going back to that, who is advocating for those people? That is the trend, and it's really, I think, our responsibility, all of us, to figure out how to reach those people. Afterward, I said, go to Renaissance. She's like, what's Renaissance? I said, just go. Just go. And, you know, so it just brought forward again for me that there are so many folks that are falling into this independent sector, not always by choice, and they're happy that they still have their profession, but, you know, when they realize that they owe, you know, 8% or, you know, 24% on their income and hadn't really thought of that.
I was going to add just one thing, and that is we forgot about the retirees when we started thinking about independent workers, because there's a lot of individuals that are, number one, being forced into retirement, that are not ready to retire, that are actually starting a business and becoming an independent worker. So.
Okay, we have Oscar, and then I'm going to ask Barbara to speak because you're on one of those tight.
I actually have a comment.
Oh, you have a comment too.
I see an opportunity already.
Okay, good. And then we'll go back after Oscar, and then Barbara, your comment, and then your other comments, and then we'll have more comments.
Very quickly, the private sector is addressing this contingent workforce need. There's a company out there called TaskRabbit. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. But they actually are able to help anyone, you know, homeowner, small business owner with small tasks, and they're even developing their service to be the employer of record. So, yeah, the private sector is way ahead of us as usual.
There's roughly 60 online marketplaces for independent workers in today. You know, the Elance, the TaskRabbits. There's about 60 of them right now. So, and more every day.
That's right.
So, Barbara, thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it and spending the afternoon with us. So, thanks you.
Well, and maybe this is redundant to TaskRabbit, although I thought that was more of a job matching kind of deal, but you know, ADP sprung out of the need for people to kind of hook into a centralization. It would be interesting to have like an electronic, like an e-trans function, a company or companies that were like the hub for the 60-year-old to drop into and then just put her data in, you know, every day or every week, and then they basically generate everything. And, you know, so that basically her whole big bookkeeping function is outsourced and handled. And also that could become, you know, they could do graphs of growth, they could give her patterns, they could say where are your best margins coming from. I mean, there's a lot that they could become her QuickBooks and her CFO. I mean, it'd be a very interesting idea. I think there's a real opportunity for business there. Interesting. Yeah, it would be. Oh.
The sponsors of this report do actually that. The MBO partners. That's already well underway.
So my question is, why doesn't the 60-year-old know about them?
Right.
Yeah. So obviously part of it is that the word needs to get out.
Online all the time, like
Children are. No, it's true. Well, now that brings me to the point that I was going to make. There's a lot to make, and I'm not going to go over what I do and am doing as the small business advocate, kind of my platform of my strategy for this role. But I think, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to point at this thing. I'm not good at this. I want to look at the whole room. I think that what I would say about this is, and I know Nathan may be interested in this, I have from the beginning of this job been thinking about the idea that there's a real need to understand the cohorts of businesses, and they call them the baby boomers, I call them the legacy folks, the people I used to lend money to when I was running California statewide. What I want to understand is how are the 20 and 30-year-olds running their businesses, and a lot of them are doing it off the iPad and off their cell phone. And so the real question for me as the advocate becomes, what are the differences in the way they interact with government? What does government need to do in order to see the future and plan for them in their growth? And I think of Jerry Brown as this 30-year, 50-year, 100-year visionary, and in my mind there's not enough focus on, we're still dealing in the legacy environment. We're still saying we've got to figure out how to make compliance and regulation more transparent and easier for businesses. But really, I don't hear from a lot of the younger businesses. I'm usually hearing from the older businesses that they're having trouble understanding compliance or regulation. So the information, the kids seem to, or okay, I've got kids in their 30s. 30s, so I'm aging myself. But the businesses that are started and run by 20 and 30-year-olds are really, information is not their challenge. But my question is, what is? What is their challenge in growth? What are they looking towards? Do they care whether they ever own their own building? Do they care whether they grow to 100 employees? What are they going to look like? And one thought I had, Nathan, you may want to take up, I may still do it, which is I thought it would be really great to celebrate businesses in that cohort. And I wanted to go out, and everybody's paying attention to the Google types, the innovation types. I want to go to the auto repair guy and gal that are, 32 years old and running the auto house down here in Davis. And how are they running their business? How does a pizza joint look that's owned by a 32-year-old versus a 62-year-old? What are they doing differently? What do they see as their needs for growth? And what do they need from government in order to meet their needs in nonprofit sector in terms of meeting their needs for growth and expansion in their life? And it may not be about hiring people. It may be this whole networking of consultants and working with. I'm a little resistant to independent contractor. I think every individual is actually, in their own way, even if they work for someone else, you still are on a personal level a small business, in the sense of you have a profit and loss statement. It's called your W-2 if you're employed, and the loss comes from the expenses you've built up, your home mortgage or your rent, etc. And your balance sheet is what's your IRA and what do you have in savings, and do you own that couch or are you leasing to own? And so in some way, we all are small businesses, and I wonder whether in dealing with the IRS you take baby steps and take advantage of the fact that the SBA Advocacy Office actually calls single non-employee entities firms. So when you interact with the IRS, you may need to take the baby step of saying, we're going to talk about those non-employee businesses, firms with you, because we think they're getting unequal treatment right now, and we want to talk to you about what we think could happen, and then you can move them to the new era. There's always an opportunity to do that. So I think this is exciting work, and I'm really looking forward to what I was going to do. I never finished the story, Nathan. I wanted to get a kid who could film, and I had someone whose son had gone to film school, but he wants to do something else. He wants to do what do you call it, moving art, what do you call it, where it's fixed art, something, not multimedia, you know.
Installations?
Thank you, installation art. But what I was going to do is make appointments with all these different small businesses that are run in that cohort in all different industries. I wanted to see the food processor in Vernon. I wanted to see the garment manufacturer in South Central LA. I wanted, I had all these ideas about just doing these interviews of these. I'd ask all these entrepreneurs or businesses basic 5 general kind of broad questions and just tape them and then piece it together and put it on the GoBiz website and kind of highlight what they're thinking and where they're going and just kind of beginning the kind of movement to pay attention to these cohorts because they're exciting and it's not that the innovative people, the people in Silicon Valley, they're exciting, but we get plenty of information about them. What about our auto repair guy? I want to hear about what he and she are thinking, or she, or them. What are they thinking? What do they want to do with their future? And how long do they think they're going to run that repair facility? And what do they want to do next? So that's kind of my comments to you guys given what we're talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you say you were looking for someone that would do the filming for you?
Yeah,
I got some.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bid against you.
Wait, what about me?
There's a little trick to it. You can't pay anything.
But can you put their name on the video on the website?
I had an insight. It was my partner's son, and so I can't really do sponsors. It's really hard when you're dealing with the governor's office too. You would be surprised.
Pay for something for once in a while for small business.
I haven't, Claudia. I have not given up on this. It is continuing to excite me. And I could just do it with my iPhone at this point.
TGS has some money for this.
Yeah. Well, somebody does. I think it needs to get done. And the thing is, the video is more about how do we bring it out into the public? How do we highlight it? And how do we make it an event that people are paying attention to? So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So, Brandon, your words of wisdom. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Actually, I think this is perfect timing for what I was going to say, and I was kind of waiting to see if anyone would bring up social enterprises as a growing field, emerging market, especially with Gen Ys and everything. And I know with myself being a lender, it's something that I'm trying to stay relevant. As Oscar was saying, kind of behind the 8 ball, I feel like a lot. And with social enterprises, I see with Gen Y in particular is they don't care about that profit or gain more in employees. They care more about impact, right? And that's something that I don't think we're really capable of measuring. We're in a place to measure at this point with that. But a couple of really interesting things are happening with social enterprises. One is there's these groups coming together, these hubs. Hub LA, there's one in San Francisco, I think there might be one in Sacramento. These entrepreneurs come together. So there's kind of fighting the tendency that I think a lot of nonprofits had. And there's a difference between social enterprise and nonprofits. Nonprofits are nonprofit. Social enterprises are for-profit, but with a social mission, right? And so they don't have the ability to have redundancy in their missions as much. And so these social hubs are happening. There's also legislation that's happening. B Corps. State of California recognizes B Corps, which allow the fiduciary responsibilities not just be for, for profit, but also for that impact as well. So it's not just about the shareholders' value, but about also being able to make impact without getting sued, which is really important. So that's just something I wanted to bring to the table.
Thanks, Brandon. Can I respond to that briefly? I just got back from the Social Enterprise Alliance conference, and I've been trying to bring CAMEO into more of a dialogue with that. And Cecily Jackson, some of you know her, she's very active with SEA as well, and she's an attorney for CAMEO as well. I think that an implication for a lot of your work is to reach out to more social enterprises and embrace them in your work, whether it's an incubator, and the incubator at Renaissance has always had some, and it probably could even be more. Not necessarily in technology. I mean, the hubs tend to attract technology, although the maker hubs like Hacker Lab, whom we heard from this morning, are covering a really broad range of different kinds of makers. So I think the incubator, but also the business assistance, and lending, that's an area, Anne, we have to talk about, because, I don't know if she's still here, because social enterprises can't qualify for SBA microloans because they're largely nonprofit, and the for-profit is sometimes not as strong as the nonprofit side. And we have to get SBA to change its definition of a business. And I think we're really close to it, and I think CAMEO could actually be a leader in that. Any other thoughts?
I'm sorry, are you saying that B Corps aren't eligible per SBA guidelines, or that they just don't typically get the loan?
If it's a B Corp that registers at a 501c3, which many social enterprises are nonprofits, or they may be for-profit businesses, but they don't have any profit. So that can be a problem when you're qualifying for a loan. But I know that SBA doesn't finance nonprofits, per se. And so that's with social enterprises, you've got this, blended, it's a hybrid.
We had a comment, Tia?
Just in some of the things that I've heard around the room recently, is, there you go, Heidi. In response to working with millennials, I think, and especially for the government working with millennials, I think one is speed. They're so quick, and I can say they as in, I'd say a lot of the people I work with are in their 20s, and they're so fast, and government can't keep up. So they have all their stuff, they're supposed to apply for a loan, but by the time the government person who they're working with gets back to them, they've missed the deadline. And then it's just like, then they have to start over, and now they're pissed, and now they hate the government, and they overreact. I'm serious. And then they come to me, and I'm like, I'm a nonprofit, I don't have enough resources for you, and then we start this whole cycle again. So it's again, just picking up the speed, and certain groups like the Department of Motor Vehicles, I know we all love to hate them, but actually, they've done a lot of great things, especially with online utilization. Like, if you actually use the DAV online, like it's actually really efficient to get your license renewed. And it's not just getting your license renewed, there's all this other stuff. And so why can't other government departments be like that? Or like, as a veteran, we love to bash the Veterans Administration. I mean, it's kind of a hobby. But on the other hand, the Veterans Administration, especially the healthcare and benefits, has done really great things online for the millennial generation. And that you can now track your claim online. You just go in, and so instead of calling and sitting on the phone and getting really pissed, because us vets get pissed all the time, like you are actually tracking it online, and you can log in every day, and it's really fantastic like that. And so I think it's, again, looking at the attention span of millennials. And also, you know, we don't want a packet of information this thick. Just don't give it to us, because we're not going to read it. We're going to skim it, give me a one-page bullet points, and
text it to me.
Yeah, I mean, but honestly, I mean, I get grant applications back written in text language, and I'm just like, wait, you went to college? And I mean, but that's because the speed at what they're working at. And so, like, we need to, you know, be cognizant that a lot of these forms are being reviewed on people's smartphones. You know, what are they looking at? What's downloadable? Like, it's like kind of like catching up of that way, you know, because you only have their attention for a second, and you know, how can we kind of change the way we do things? And I really think it is possible. I mean, if the DAV can do it, I think everybody else can too.
Thank you, Tia, for that expose. Government workings. Any other comments?
Yes. Just back to the social benefits corps. The boomers are really big on doing the passion business, as we call them, and trying to get into social causes. Very, very big on impact, and particularly because they're so disillusioned with their corporate experience. And so, oftentimes when they are going through the unretirement and trying to decide what they're going to do in their second phase, they'll turn to nonprofits or to social benefit companies and set those up. So I don't know if you've done any work with Encore.org in San Francisco. Its whole mission is to help basically boomers find that passion business, and they go with, was it passion, purpose, and paycheck? Are there the three P's that they focus on? So
are they actually providing consulting or counseling to that group?
Is the Encore Entrepreneurs through AARP? Is that the one we're talking about?
It's the same group. They provide tools more than consulting, but they are working with AARP, and they're also working with SCORE.
Yeah, SCORE's in Orange County. SCORE Encore is doing workshops and individualized training through their partnership with AARP under the Encore Entrepreneur banner or marketing push. AARP does all the ads and all the outreach, and then SCORE does the delivery, basically. Because if you go on the OC SCORE website, there's nothing about Encore Entrepreneurs.
There's nothing about it?
Even though, I mean, I was looking to see where I was supposed to go to speak. It was a SCORE event, and I couldn't figure out what the address was. I went on their website. There was nothing on there, and it was on the AARP site that the information's out there, and the outreach is done through AARP.
I can share it offline. I did a workshop earlier in the month with SCORE and Encore AARP. It was a small business event. I'll provide that information offline.
Thank you. I would be curious to know if Stephen and Carolyn would be open or would like to share with us some of your thoughts that come to mind after hearing our group speak and respond to your presentation, if you have.
Sure. Yes. No, I meant her. No, I think this group has, you know, sort of a great opportunity, because the piece is missing when we're out interviewing these folks and we're out talking to them one-on-one. They're really, many of them are just hungry for skills help, directional help, and then particularly, as I said before, if they're in the product businesses, more so than personal services, they just need a little bit of financing to get going. The great news is, with the technology that's out there now, most small businesses don't need excuse me, huge amounts of capital. So I think there is, so I think your group has a great opportunity to impact a lot of these folks and help them out enormously. And I'm about to choke, so I'm going to get a glass of water and pass the thing over if I can. I don't know if you have more to say.
I'm just really impressed with all of the different insights you bring from the field to us, and so that's very, very helpful. Some of, there's been a discussion today about language, and language is so important in terms of telling the stories that we find in our data and making them understandable to other people. So we appreciate the dialogue and look forward to learning more about what you're doing so that we can make our stories more relevant. Because I think, as Noe said, that relevance is really the key to making anything worth continuing with. Now, one of the things, the generation stuff that seems to have caught everyone's attention, and I think that that's just such an important piece of how to connect with people, because everyone's stories do relate to how they self-identify. And we are working more and more on those cohorts that we represented, and then we're also trying to see how those are shifting over time. Are these behaviors more life cycle, or are they because someone's a Gen Y or a boomer? And so as we do this research, continuing over time, we're able to tease that out a little bit more. So we'll keep you posted on that. But to your point, time is really critical for everyone, but everyone approaches time differently. And you're at Gen Y, the last people that Gen Y thinks to turn to is government for any help. I mean, they just think they're completely incompetent. And and it's because that sense they're very impatient, and in some ways that's fair because they turn things so quickly. They just think that you should be able to respond because I've responded to you, I've given you the information. And they might not understand the depth of information they need to provide. And so it is a real education process on both sides, I think, to communicate with them. And so each of those, trying to understand what you really need to establish the relationship so that you can go forward, it might be helpful to piece those layers out and then engage someone in a process and then ask for the next step so that you can let them know that you're actually working on something and it's worth that investment on their side. So anyway, thank you so much for today. It's been really helpful for us too.
We just have one quickie thing that came out of our group, but I've also heard it from other people here too, and I feel this way myself, Carolyn and Steve, is that if you could do more drilling down on the underserved populations, because that's really the group that gets left out in a lot of the economic development planning. We take a very broad tent approach. We see entrepreneurship as engaging immigrant and people over 60, and that everybody is of value and everybody has something to contribute. But even you would acknowledge that your research didn't really quite address that, and so it would be helpful if you could drill down a little bit more on that.
How do you all identify who you're actually surveying, and is there any opportunity for CAMEO to have segments of populations of clients that we all serve involved in the survey process?
Well, I think that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that if there's some way that CAMEO members could share with us thinking about the structure we're using for the research, if you could give us feedback about what is your constituency, how do they map out in the same areas? And I don't know if, some structured surveys would be helpful for that, or just sitting down and having a bit of a reflective, time and saying, okay, well, people that I'm working with fall into these categories, or their attitudes are X, Y, and Z. That would probably be the closest we could get to going into that more in-depth field information and being able to turn that for you into some more valuable, another layer of dimensionality. When we work with, because we're working through surveys now, nobody uses the phones for surveys because nobody picks up phones. So we have to work through these they're very structured online panels, and They map out to the U.S. Census, and they're thoughtfully done, but they are limited because they're online. And so, so in as much as we need to reach beyond that, we don't have that touch, and you do. So, so think about. I mean, that'd be a good brainstorming. How could we structure your knowledge into some information that we might be able to tie into the research, and then turn it back to you.
Jupina, do you have time for one more comment?
Yes, from Carmen, of course.
I think this relates to the Claudia's last comment, and I was just as I was thinking on how we're describing the whys and all of that. I'm not sure that the whys in my community will be the same. I think there's Brett and I were talking in the morning about how bad education is in some areas of our state, and one area is there, the Salinas and Power Valley, and schools are really struggling, and I'm not sure that the whys in our community are at the same level, and they're be facing the same, or will have the same attitudes. I think they're facing a lot of challenges, and we need to also kind of analyze that.
That's a great point.
People, I mean, a lot of we're just talking also about other CAMEO members that serve the rural areas, but the rural areas in Shasta is very different from the farm working communities where we are, and I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of, I'd to say, marginalization still in our communities, and I think that's another. I mean, I think there are things that are definitely we can use from this research, but I think it'll be interesting to look at certain communities, and farm working communities are very unique.
Any more comments? Nancy Swift.
It's a question. I'm wondering if you have any clients or any examples of doing research for regions or cities or municipalities. Because in rural areas, we're all looking for a lot of data that shows us, well, what the heck is the new economy? Prove to me the old economy died. And what's the business I'm supposed to be asking to come here? But maybe the question is, how do we bring back the new trend lines? And what are they? And I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm starting to go into comment. I'm wondering if you've ever worked with,
just go ahead and comment.
with any cities or municipalities.
We've mostly done national work. We have done some regional and local work, and it's certainly very doable. There's some other folks that do more of the that type of work. There's a firm called EMSI, Economic Modeling Specialists Incorporated. They're out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that actually has a lot of county level data and information, and I don't think it's terribly expensive. I could be wrong, but so there are some other firms I think that are better at the very local and regional work than we are. It's just not, it's not our specialty. It is their specialty.
Thanks. Can you pass? Vincent, can you pass that to?
I'm going to break a personal record and be brief. A couple of things. One is there's ESRI, which is a institution that does location-based intelligence. So there may be a way to take the existing data that we already have within our network and put it on a map so that in true GPS or in true navigation style fashion, we can start with where are we now, where do we want to go, and how do we get there. That's one thing. And other than that, I've got some other comments that I'll share regarding research that are mainly questions that I'll do later, offline.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
We're talking about how do we attract the younger generations? How do we work with more of the millennials? One of the things that, one of the ideas being pushed out there by Michael Porter is this idea of shared value. It's a very basic concept. How do we take a societal problem and turn it into a business model? And that's the kind of thing that I think would resonate with the younger generations, but also some of these, people sort of reinventing themselves mid-career. You know, they want to feel good about what they're doing. How do we communicate the concept of shared value? And I'm actually trying to develop a workshop around it.
Right, and in the bigger picture, the shared value for all of the CAMEO members addressing
Of
this
course.
problem of people like this lovely chaplain who I met, who's, you know, suddenly now an independent worker. And
Not
so
by
that-
choice.
Exactly. So, anyone else?
Also, I think the whole notion of collaboration is really important. And, you know, with Gen Y, that's another thing that you can, if you can think about them more instead of individual clients, trying to pull in this this collaborative nature that they have. It's so powerful, and it's also a community builder, right? Because you pull in one person, but they're really working with 3 other friends, or the other friends are just providing input, and then those 3 people have other business ideas, and it's just that the structure that is set up traditionally is to serve individuals, right? And so I don't know how to do that. I don't, you know, but if you guys could be creative about that, it would be a big help.
It's about tapping networks.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that was definitely the message of our rural summit this morning. Gina Lujan, who has this hacker lab here in Sacramento, that was one of her key points, I would say, is you have it in your community. You just need to find them, and they're there. So, and I think that applies everywhere. Claudia, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, and I just actually, since Pamela Patterson isn't here, I want to just share her aha moment, which really got me thinking about CAMEO and what we could be doing for you, or getting some other ideas out there. And she said, you know how Pamela, she just said, I just wish my staff would turn the training on its head, and there's content out there in every aspect of business planning. And we can get it, and it's probably free. But what people don't have is community, and they need to come in and they get that community where our center, our Women's Business Center, our SBDC is. So how can we sort of get the training done over here and then bring people in as what's called meetups? We used to call them peer support groups, remember? But they're called meetups. And so the more we've been talking today, the more I've been thinking, if you could reimagine your organizations, your programs, where the training became a vehicle for bringing people in together, I think we would make a huge step, and it would also be a lot more cost effective, and it may be pretty transformational. I can't even imagine what it could be, but I just know it could be special. So I wanted to share that. And then just want to thank everybody for coming. It's great to see you all. Thank you, Steve and Carolyn. It was wonderful. You got us thinking, and I've heard you kids the second or third time. It's sunk in, right, Carmen? We were saying, like, even though we heard it before, it's like certain things really sunk in, some themes.